My name is Johnny Trumbukas, and today I'd like to show you how I made this Kumiko writing desk. There is a total of 570 pieces, and it's made from cherry, walnut, and basswood. These are all the parts that make up the top of the desk and the drawers, which is what I'll be starting with. I asked my lumberyard to S4S these boards, and after staying in my shop for a while, they stayed perfectly flat. However, I still joined the edges to make sure that they were perfectly square to the faces. The boards I'll be using for the top and bottom of this desktop were a little wider than I needed, so I ripped them down to be a little more manageable but still left them oversized. I then cut biscuit slots to help with alignment during glue up. I glued two panels this way, which will be the top and bottom of the box that is the desktop. Once the glue dried, I taped these pieces together and cut them down to their final dimensions. This makes sure that they're the exact same size. Moving on to the joinery, I used a dado stack to cut a groove for the back panel in the top, bottom, and side pieces. I also used it to cut a rabbet in the side pieces and used a sacrificial board to prevent cutting into my fence. Next, I needed to cut a dado for the drawer dividers. So I made this quick jig that references from the left and right of where the dado will be and removed the material in 2 passes. I repeated this for all 4 dados. Because these are stop dados, I need to cut a notch on the dividers since I want them to run the full length of the inside of the box and be flush with the front face. I took several small cuts on the table saw and used a stop block for easy repeatability. The back panel is made from walnut, which will match the legs. To help it slide into its groove a little bit easier, I used a block plane to chamfer the edges. After a bit of sanding, I can glue the box together. And this was a very simple glue up as I only added glue on the grooves for the dividers and on the rabbets of the side pieces. Once all the pieces were in place, I used clamps in every direction to make sure that all the joints were pulled closed. While these were drying, I started on the drawers. And I wanted these to have a unique look, so I book matched the bottoms and I added another feature that you'll see later on. One of the book matched boards had some figure in it, which revealed this heart. This will go in the center drawer, and it's definitely one of my favorite features out of the entire desk. With all 3 panels glued, I moved on to the drawer faces and sides. I wanted continuous grain along the drawer faces, so I marked out all the pieces to make sure I wouldn't mix them up, and then cut the board to length. This is the first time I made drawers without any drawer slides, and in order for them to work properly without any slop, I needed a snug piston fit. So I really took my time here and snuck up on all the final dimensions. I'm using an interlocking rabbet joint for this drawer, and I've never tried this before, which is exactly why I'm trying it here. This entire desk was a first-time experience for a lot of different processes, and I'm very pleased with how it turned out, and a lot of the processes that were new to me were actually a lot easier than I thought they would be. If you're looking to try something new and you might be a little afraid of it, go ahead and try it out, and you might be surprised with the results that you end up with. Next, I cut the groove for the drawer bottoms, and also cut the drawer bottoms to their final size. After a bit of sanding, I can glue the drawer together, but unfortunately I forgot to record this step, so here's a clip of me taking the clamps off in reverse. I glued the drawer together, but I totally forget that it gets a cutout right here, so it can act as a finger pull. Kind of like this. The way I did it was I made this template, put it behind the drawer face, and then used a pattern bit on the router, and then chiseled out the corners. I also added this basswood detail, which will match the basswood that will be in the Kumiko in the back portion of this desk. Next up is the legs, and these will be 75 degrees from the floor. So I cut a rough angle on the bandsaw. I'm also saving these offcuts because they'll come in handy later. I've only made a bridle joint once before, so I wanted to try it again for this desk. I attached the fence to my tenon jig at 75 degrees and used a dado stack to cut both parts of the joint. And I cut these joints a little bit deeper than needed so that I can trim them flush after the glue up. I also had two 90-degree bridle joints, and these will connect the legs to the piece that runs along the back. Next, I move on to attaching the legs to the desk top, and for that I'm using dowel joinery. After drilling the holes in the legs, I used dowel sensors to transfer the hole locations to the side of the box. I added marks to the legs that needed to line up with the top of the desk so that the leg would sit at that 75 degree. I only have two dowel sensors of this size, and just for extra assurance I wanted to add 3 dowels. So I drilled the top and bottom holes first. That way I can put dowels in those 2 holes and then use a dowel sensor in the middle hole to mark out that location. With all that done, I can glue up the legs. This is where those previous offcuts come in handy. I cut them into strips so that they won't interfere with the joint and place them under the clamp jaw. This way the clamp has something straight to clamp onto and won't skew the angle or slip off. Once the glue dried, I trimmed off the extra material. After gluing the dowels to the legs, I add glue to the joint, but wipe off the excess, that way there won't be any glue squeeze out to clean up later, but there's still plenty of glue left in the joint. I used a dead blow mallet to drive the dowels in all the way, then added clamps with some scrap pieces of wood to avoid potentially damaging the legs. I also added the bottom piece in place so the legs don't have an opportunity to bow in or out. I didn't add glue yet. I let the rest of the glue dry overnight and came back the next day to glue this piece in place. I did it this way just because it would be a little more accessible. Once all of that dried, I trimmed the top of the leg flush with the desk using a Japanese pull saw. Next up is the Kumiko, and I'm making the grid out of 1/2 inch by 1/8 inch basswood using my Kumiko sled. I wanted this desk to match a lamp that I made in a previous video, so I went with a 60-degree grid. If you haven't seen that video, there's a link up here in the top right corner as well as down in the description. With the grids done, I can start on the infill, and for the entire process I'm switching between a 30 and 60 degree Kumiko jig. I'm starting out with these pieces that will make the grid square and outline its final shape. With all of these pieces cut and fit to size, I remove them and add a small amount of glue to secure them in place. Once that glue dries, I can use these pieces as a guide to trim off the extra material of the grid. Normally at this point you would make the infill and then make the frame for it later, but I decided to make the frame first. So here I'm making a simple frame out of cherry, and the Kumiko panels will friction fit into it. The frame looked a little odd to me at this point, so I added these strips of walnut to give a small extra detail. I also left them slightly proud of the frame to add a bit of a shadow line. Because they're proud, I didn't glue them in place quite yet, as they would interfere with future steps. Now I can start on the infill, and I went back and forth quite a bit on the design, but I settled on what you'll see here in a bit, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I knew I wanted to incorporate the Asanoha pattern, but I also wanted to try out the Gomagara pattern. I haven't tried this pattern before, so it took a little figuring out to do. If you're curious on how to make this pattern, let me know down in the comments and I can make a separate video on it. With pieces assembled, I can do a test fit to see how it all looks. I love how this pattern turned out, and it's definitely something that I'll be incorporating into future projects. The other pattern in these panels is the Asanoha, which you may have seen me do on this channel before. After fitting all the pieces, I took them all out and glued them in just like the pieces I did earlier, working on one section at a time to make sure not to mix up the pieces. At this point, the glue on the miters of the frames had dried and I needed a way to reinforce the miters, as they're generally not a very strong joint. To keep the look clean and simple, I used dowels on the top and bottoms of the frames. These will later be hidden when the frames are attached to the rest of the desk. With that done, I trimmed the frame to its final size and glued the walnut strips in place. While gluing the Kumiko panels to the desk, I set them in from the top and the bottom by 1/4 inch. It's a small detail, but enhances the design quite a bit. The very last thing to do is to add finish, and for that I'm using Simple Finish with Wax by Maker Brand Co. It added the perfect close to wood feel and look that I wanted for this desk. Since this is an oil-based finish, I did not add it to the Kumiko sections because it would yellow the wood, which is not quite the look I'm going for. So in that area, I added some light coats of spray lacquer just to add a little bit of protection. Before starting this project, I almost didn't make it. There's a few processes that I hadn't done before, like the piston fit drawers and the Gomagara pattern, but I couldn't be happier with the results. So if you're on the fence of trying something new, give it a shot and you might surprise yourself. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in future videos where I'll probably make a matching chair.